Welcome to today's defence episode of the Power of Perspective podcast with myself, Hannah, your host. So today we will be talking about esports and exploring how competitive gaming can help defence connect with new audiences. So joining me today are Lieutenant General Sir Tom Copinger-Symes, who is Deputy Commander of Cyber and Specialist Operations Command, Fergus Hay, co-founder and CEO of the Hacking Games, and Carl Tillett, who is a data management lead and an esporter from BAE Systems Digital Intelligence. So, welcome to the show, everybody. How are you?
Hi, Hannah. Good. Thanks.
Great to be here, Hannah. Thank you very much for the invitation. Very much looking forward to it.
Oh, thank you very much for coming. So, before we kind of dive straight into esports and that side of it, Jen, Tom, would you mind giving us a bit of context, a bit of kind of scene setting for the conversation we're about to have?
Yeah, thanks. So look, we live in a pretty extraordinary world at the moment. I've been in uniform for about 35 bit more years. And I think the threat has never been quite so serious, quite so unpredictable. And we're seeing that play out, yes, in places like Ukraine, but also in places like Denmark with the current drone situation. We're seeing big firms like Jaguar Land Rover and Co-op hit by cyber attacks. And of course, other dreadful activities on the streets of UK. So, there's something going on and we're all responding to that. The government set out a sort of approach to that in a thing called the Strategic Defence Review, and critically has announced very much increased funding for defence and national security over the next 5 to 10 years, which is part of that response. But in truth, one of the real issues we've got is we're going broke for talent before we go broke for money. So in this digital age, a lot of the skills we have both in the defence workforce, and when I say defence, that's not just people in uniform or civil servants or intelligence agencies, that's all of defence, including industry like BAE Systems. We're short of talent, and we're short of talent that's good in the digital world, good with data, good with cyber. And so that's the framing for this, is we're really on a hunt for talent, to develop talent, and to work with our teams across the country and across the world, because this is a sort of team of teams game. It's a collaborative game in dealing with the threats of the 21st century. So that's the slightly serious framing before we get on to how we gamify this and make it fun to identify talent, to develop that talent, and to make sure we're rewarding that talent and sort of building it across the defence enterprise. I hope that suits.
Yeah, that's great. So it's all about people, really, people and tech and how those two come together.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Fergus, can you tell me a bit more about what you do and how you link into this?
Yeah, absolutely. So we set up the Hacking Games to kind of actually meet the kind of national need that General Tom has just outlined. So we're on a mission to create a generation of ethical hackers to make the world safer. And ultimately what we're doing is identifying kids who are right now developing amazing cybersecurity skills on gaming platforms. It's like a live laboratory of cybersecurity skills. But they're invisible. They're invisible to the governments. They're invisible to the private sector. The only people who've worked out that these incredibly talented generation have got incredible skills are the bad guys, are the cyber gangs. And you're seeing a recruitment of young kids, British kids in particular, often neurodivergent, unbelievable gamers, great hackers in the gaming communities. But they're being recruited by the cyber criminal gangs. And you'll see that in real life. So Europol published data that showed that 69% of European teenagers have committed a cybercrime. 69%.
Oh my God.
The FBI will tell you that the average age of someone they arrest for serious crime is 37 years old. But the average age they arrest for cybercrime is 19 years old. So what you've got is a generation of natural-born hackers developing their skills in the live laboratory of online gaming. But they're invisible. And, in the bad guys have worked it out. But as General Tom has just outlined, this is a war for talent. And this generation is either going to be a liability or an asset. And we're pretty committed to making sure they're an asset by inspiring them to do the right thing, identifying their talent, then providing a pathway to drive civic and national resilience by joining either the public sector or the private sector, which is why we work with General Tom and his team to ensure that we secure our borders.
That's quite shocking and fairly kind of grounding scene setting there. So thank you both very much for that. So esports, for those unfamiliar, how do you define esports? What are esports? And I don't mind who wants to take that one.
Yeah, so very broadly is the answer. So, there is a formal sort of definition of esports, professional gamers competing on a whole range of games for millions and millions of pounds of prize money. But for the purpose of this, I'd define it much more broadly. So, a lot of online gaming, computer gaming for people of my generation, or video gaming for people of my generation, serious games, so strategy games that people like to play that are very strategic, very, very related to sort of formal military wargaming, if you like. I'd include that in this too. But frankly, anything that's identifying talent and developing cognitive abilities online, that ability to work between the virtual and the physical world, is absolutely relevant for us. And of course, we're learning from Ukraine, all of their best first-person view drone operators came from the gaming community, because those fine motor skills that you develop, the ability to work between the physical and virtual world, they are very, very real skills to have in the physical battle space these days, as well as the online battle space of cyber and digital and data. So I define it pretty broadly, to be honest.
Folks, you'd like to add anything?
Actually, I was going to ask General Tom something. Do you think that it's always been in military behavior to think of gaming and wargaming as a training mechanism?
Yeah, so look, we used football and rugby and cricket and so on hundreds of years ago to keep people fit before gyms were around, to make them into team players, to get them to work as a team, to develop resilience and robustness in sort of areas of physical stress and pain, if you're talking about rugby, but also to teach them ethics. So they teach them how to win, but to win well and win within a set of sort of ethical guidelines. So we've done that forever. Go back a bit further, you'll find hunting and shooting and fishing and, I don't know, polo or whatever would probably fit that thing, the traditional sports. We've always done it. If you go back even further, you go to Agincourt, the reason we had amazing longbowmen, they were men in those days, was that every village in England and Wales had a butt. Archery was a sport. It was something that everybody did at high days and holidays, and that meant you had amazing longbowmen when it came to fighting on the battlefield. So I think there's a really noble tradition here. All we need to do is work out how to update it. And as I remind everybody, it's not rugby or esports, it's rugby and esports. All our youngsters are playing the same old games that we played, but they also spend some time on their screens as well, ranging from their phones playing Roblox to, big rigs racing F1 or whatever else it is. So there's a long tradition of this. We just need to get with the modern day.
I'm just thinking of those kind of village games, longbowmen, that became pretty useful. What about caber tossing in Scotland? How did they deploy that in them?
I'm going to hand that question to Carl Tillett, actually, who's got a long history of cable tossing in Scotland. No, I have no idea. Maybe that was primitive bridging. I don't know.
Yes, right, exactly.
I mean, I event. I have horses. I event, and that's based on cavalry training and the 3 separate disciplines and all the things you needed to be able to evidence for that. So even not as a gamer myself, I'm on board with the military turning into sports and influencing sports.
But Hannah, what I will say is what I've learned, and I'd love Carl's view on this as well. So the overlap between hacking and gaming is 100%. So every hacker is a gamer. Not every gamer makes it as a hacker, but let me explain why. There's a great guy called Jeff Mann, who is the founder of the NSA, the National Security Agency's red teaming division. And I interviewed Jeff the other day as one of our community members. And I said, Jeff, wow, you must be really technical. You must be really good at coding. And he said, hacking's got nothing to do with the technology because it changes every day. Hacking is about puzzle solving. It's about identifying patterns and seeing solutions and working out how to navigate those patterns. And that is the genesis of gaming. And when he was a kid, he grew up doing crosswords and doing wooden puzzles and metal puzzles. And in fact, when they recruited people into Bletchley Park, it was through these unbelievably complicated puzzles. So what's really interesting is that the mindset required for gaming is incredibly appropriate to the mindset required to hacking. And if you extrapolate that into the modern world of esports, and just to give you a bit of like a pyramid of it, there are 3.2 billion gamers in the world. 3.2 billion. There are 3.5 billion football fans. 93% of Gen Z game. They spend on average per day 30 minutes on Instagram, 55 minutes on TikTok, 114 minutes a day on gaming. That's average. The Times shared research last week that British male teenagers are spending more time gaming than they are doing homework. So what happens is parents are exasperated. They pull out their hair. Little Johnny's just wasting his time upstairs. Schools are annoyed because the kids are distracted. But actually, if you reframe that, what we realize is that gaming is like a live laboratory of skills development that passes people into amazing problem solving, be it competing in live intense esports, and I want to see Carl's experience in that, but also to hacking the games and modding the games and penetrating them and finding vulnerabilities, developing mods, developing aimbots. And what we're not realizing is that this is like a university that we couldn't even imagine creating today. It's so far ahead of the academic institutions. And we've got to identify the opportunities there and see how they can join, the defense industry as potential talent. But Carl, I'd love to hear from you about your esports experiences. Like, does that relate? How did you get into it?
Yeah. So I think a little bit like that. I started out at an early age, more casually gaming, as you do, and it's not largely competitive, but it's just a bit of fun in the evenings. And there was a turning point at some point, and that was when I actually got into simulator racing, so like the F1 games and all of that. And so I'd built the rig and I'd got all the gear and everything and started doing it. And that was really when it started turning into transitioning from just playing a game to actually feeling like doing a sport in a sense. And that did come with kind of a mindset shift of, you're starting to really want to win, and you're kind of looking for every little area where you can make an improvement. And then also the community along with it as well. Suddenly you go from, you get in with the people who are kind of really enthusiastic about something. You kind of then collectively work together to in the same way that you would in a traditional sport as well.
How old were you when you started, Carl?
Probably Wii Sports, age of 7, but probably getting into it was probably around the age of around 13, because I started building computers at a similar time as well. So I think all these kind of things go hand in hand. I was interested. I wanted to
like that coding. I mean, Carl and I were talking earlier, and he started coding his own games, creating his own games. And again, that's underestimated as a value in kids getting involved with gaming. They really develop some very relevant digital skills online, building their own games. And then I think the thing that really came out, Carl, just talk about that ability to build teams online. And the greatest trope, I think, is that parents think, oh, this is a lonely sport. Well, it might be lonely in physical terms. It doesn't have to be. But actually, you build really strong teams in the virtual world. And that feels like the world of work to me at the moment. So, Carl, I know you spoke about that earlier, how you build teams.
Yeah, definitely. So I suppose even from the experience of the racing side of it, kind of if you watch Formula One or any racing on the telly, they're always on the radio with the engineers. They have the pre-briefs and the debriefs afterwards and everything. And actually, in the esports side of it as well, it's exactly the same. You're on the phone to people while you're racing and battling at virtually 200 miles an hour. You have the pre-briefs to work out how you're going to do the strategy of the race. You have the debriefs to work out what went well, what didn't go well. And you can kind of draw that like-for-like comparison as actually was working in a team and having those communication skills, whether it being on a sports field, whether it being on the phone like it is on that. I think that transition and kind of the equivalent in a professional world are really prominent. And I think, there are definitely a lot of skills to be brought up from, that communication, that teamwork side of it that will be really useful to build up the capability of a generation.
So what kind of games are played as sports?
So we've just, in UK Defence, we've just, allowed four games to be treated as sports in UK Defence. We have a bit of a difference in opinion with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport on this, because they're not yet endorsed esports as formal sports. So this is small policy in UK Defence. I have to say that as a disclaimer before I get into trouble. But broadly, League of Legends, Rocket League, F1, everybody understands what F1 does, and Call of Duty. Unsurprisingly, Call of Duty sort of very obviously resonant for soldiers particularly. So a range of games will expand that over time, but we're sort of starting small. And that's really encouraging soldiers, sailors, aviators, the specialist in Cyber Command to be able to spend some work time developing their skills in these games as well as doing it in their spare time. And that may sound like a small thing, but that's massive for some of our youngsters who are a bit bemused by, we're all fascinated by playing rugby or cricket or football, but these things have been verboten up until now. And now we're saying, no, that's good. And we recognize the value of them. And that really connects you to the people in your organization. So it's early days, and we're starting a bunch of competitions and so on as well, which we can come back to. But that's broadly where we started.
And those competitions, kind of, what are the parallels between physical sports and online sports? Is it tournaments? How do people watch?
Yeah, so should I start on that? I mean, with British Forces Broadcasting, that's our sort of internal BFBS. It's our internal broadcaster, really getting entertainment and knowledge out to people when they're deployed around the world. They've kicked off a competition within the UK called Pro League. If I show you the T-shirt, there we are. It was the final last Sunday at Staffordshire University. And that they've just focused on Rocket League to start with. Rocket League, for those who don't know, it is a sort of mashup of cross-country driving and football in 3D. So it's this amazingly, for me, disorientating game. But if you're a fighter pilot or a Challenger tank gunner or somebody working between the physical and the virtual world, it's very relevant to what people do at work in defense. Amazing final there last Sunday. And what we're trying to do there is not just having the Army, Navy, and the Air Force playing, but bring in defense industry, bring in members of defense families as well to connect with their dad so they can play with their dad or their mum in that game and sort of take away the stigma, to bring in cadets and so on. And of course, there's a range of safeguarding issues and so on that we need to deal with. But that's the vision, to really break down the boundaries within defense, to build what we call a one defense mindset by using these games to boost skills, but also to boost teamwork. So that's one of the things we're doing internally. And then there's an international games as well, which we might come on to later on.
Tom, I thought what was really cool was, and maybe you might reference this a little bit, is what you did at Cyber Defense Marvel, and how the kind of the gamers became technical. And I don't want to steal the thunder, but I think that's a great example of how the behaviors can become applicable.
Yeah, so I suppose I mentioned serious games, esports and games and serious games. One of the serious games we run is a cyber game every year called Defense Cyber Marvel, been run by, frankly, a bunch of enthusiasts now for the best part of 10 years. Started in the Army Cyber Association. It's now outgrown that. It's much more a defense and national security thing. A lot of work with the Foreign Office on this. Takes place in about 10 or 12 different countries around the world each year. This year it was hosted in South Korea and the Republic of Korea. Fergus came out to see that. A lot of involvement from BAE Systems, actually, all around the world in that too. And there we're bringing together Brits and about 25 different nations, I think, this year to take part in, some would regard that as formal cyber training. We regard it as sort of gamified training. And that's a mashup between sort of capture the flag, hackathon, a little bit of tech challenges, a little bit of escape room activity. And we do that, as I say, across the world, hosted in this time in South Korea. And you're bringing not all cyber professionals to that, but sort of ordinary infantrymen. So people from my regiment, the Rifles, going out there to compete. Are they going to use that every day on their day job? No, but it's going to make them much better soldiers. It's going to make them much better mums and dads. It's going to make them much better sons and daughters because they're learning about cybersecurity in a really gamified way and developing their tech skills. So that's another example of sort of one of the things we're doing. And the international power of that, the soft power of that, is huge because we convene nations from all around the country, and it's a really good chance to develop skills and understanding alongside each other.
Oh, it was super cool. There was like 1,200 people in a warehouse that had an extremely bad body odor smell by the end of the 5 days. And it was like an amazing gender mix. It was in 25 different nations, I think. And it was really intense. I mean, these guys were at it like almost 24/7. They literally didn't sleep. And I thought what was really cool about it was the guys who won were the riflemen, who were actually they were not technical, but they were all gamers. They were all a bit like Carl, where like in their spare time, they're gaming insanely, but they weren't signals, much to the chagrin of the signals team, I imagine. And they weren't the technical guys, and they weren't from the intelligence agencies. They weren't from BAE. It was the riflemen. And I thought,
in all due humility, I'd say it was the run up. They in the qualifiers, they won the qualifiers. I don't want to on the whole of Defense Side Marvel, otherwise I'll get ripped apart online. But no, the point remains, that sometimes we think you've got to have a PhD to be a coder or a cyber operator. That's not true. And as Fergus said about the sort of youngsters who are gaming, the range of aptitudes you need in this world is vast, and it's not all tech aptitude either. It's very creative stuff. So it's not just STEM, it's STEAM. It's a wide range of skills, and fundamentally comes back to what Fergus said, which is problem solving. People who are fascinated to look at a problem and have that ability to look at it differently. And, in World War II, with Bletchley and then the SOE, we referred to them as corkscrew minds, people who could literally turn a problem on its side, look at it differently and say either, oh, you can solve for that really easily, or sometimes I think that's not the problem. You're looking at the symptom. The problem's there. If we solve for that, then we get strategic sort of speed and scale and exploitation. So it's really this finding problem solvers. And that's when you asked earlier about what are esports. I mean, I was also tempted to say, Sudoku, Wordle, crosswords. It doesn't really matter, provided people are developing their cognitive abilities and we're able to spot talent and develop it and bring people together either individually or in groups. So it's we're probably overdoing it, Hannah, on the explanation, but I hope that helps.
No. We've covered it. We've covered a huge amount of ground. I think it's really obvious that defense sees esports as a great. There's so many different things you've mentioned. It's really quite a broad impact you're looking for it to have, and looking to be able to develop a number of things through it. I was just wondering from Carl's perspective. So, from a gamer's perspective, maybe a little bit outside of not quite so close to defense, do you think defense has a role to play in digital spaces like gaming? Is it a relationship you think will improve gaming?
I think so, definitely. Yeah, I suppose Tom and I alluded to some of my background growing up a little bit and getting into coding kind of because of playing the games and getting into computers and circuit boards and all of that kind of thing. And I think when you get into coding at that sort of level, you kind of see that you're going to probably end up in the tech world itself. So you could probably think of a number of different companies that you'd potentially go and work at that point, of which defense probably isn't up there in the top 5 or the top 10. But actually, it should be, because there is so much innovation. There is so much kind of at the forefront of technology in the defense world. I think it would be really good for defense to be seen alongside the tech world, being able to utilize those sorts of technical and digital skills and be able to therefore kind of growing up and gathering those skills, definitely seeing that actually defense is the right place for me to go to further develop and make really good use of those skills.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I mean, look, a lot of people don't think about joining, certainly the uniform bits of defense, unless they've got a relative in there. And it's just become a bit of a sort of word of mouth association. That clearly, I mean, that's backed up by some data. It's not entirely true. And we want to break down those boundaries. And again, not just in uniform service, but in the civil service and in wider industry. And we've got to sort of make it clear as part of our sort of national resilience and national connectedness about the range of roles available. And, we're mentioning problem solving. We have the most fascinating problems in the world to solve in defense. And then, as sort of Fergus has probably alluded to, in some of our roles, certainly in Cyber and Specialist Operations Command, we can solve those problems in ways that anywhere else get you locked up. And that, for problem solvers, that's an amazingly attractive mix. Really difficult problems, and albeit within ethics, a really broad range of authorities and freedoms to go solve problems that help protect our country and increase our sort of influence abroad. That's a pretty potent mix if we can explain it to people.
So let me break that down. Hannah, can I just take Tom's point down to the actual people as well? Because we spend a lot of time with the young hackers. And what Tom's just described is an alignment against what their motivations are. So if we understand what the profile is of a Gen Z, age 12 to 27-year-old gamer hacker right now, they are, their community's online, their profile is online, their tribe is online. They are developing these skills that are invisible to the rest of the world. So they are frustrated about that. They're incredibly talented and often neurodivergent. And neurodivergence in the past, actually probably up until yesterday, has been seen as, at best, gifted and special, difficult to handle, hard to employ, hard to manage, doesn't fit the school system. At worst, as someone described it to me last week, they described it as a disability. And even the terminology neurodivergent implies that you're divergent from the norm, which implies that the norm is better. And the things about neurodivergence, and there's an amazing lady called Holly Foxcroft, who's a specialist in neurodivergence and hacker mindset research. What she will explain is that neurodivergents solve puzzles and problems much faster than anyone else. And the classic example is that a neurodivergent in maths at school, the sum would be put up on the board and they'll go, it's 192. The answer is 192. And the teacher will go, well, show me your workings. And the neurodivergent will go, I don't know what the workings are, but it's 192. And then they'll get penalized for it. Whereas like completely mediocre people like me are doing like 5 pages of like, sums to get to the same number in about an hour. And of course they get penalized. But actually what they're doing is they are seeing patterns and seeing solutions incredibly fast. So what this talent hasn't had for so long is recognition in a home. And when we spend time with this amazing generation, we recognize 5 motivations. The first thing is they want fame, because it's so frustrating for them to see YouTubers who've got no talent be famous, whereas these guys have got incredible talent, but no one's recognizing it. The second thing is they want recognition for their IQ. They're really, really bright. They're too bright for school. They know more than the computer science teachers. They find school moronically base, which is why so many of them leave really, really early. Thirdly, they're insanely competitive. They've been playing games since 5 years old. They've been top of the leaderboards, XP points, rewards, upgrades, competitive teams, getting into competitive gaming teams. So everything is a competition. They want to be top of the leaderboard. They want the badges and the medals. And then fourthly, they want to make money. But the point is, they want to make legit money and they want opportunities to do that. And then the fifth one, which is so powerful, is that at best, they were marginalized from school. At best. At worst, they were bullied badly. And what it creates is a sense of vengeance and justice. They hate bullies. They hate the bad guys. They hate people who threat act, which is why when there's a big hack, the community comes together to solve the problem. It's why they're with no incentive and no motivation apart from to take down the bad guy, be David versus Goliath. So when General Tom talks about the purpose of defending a country and being given the latitude and freedom to be able to do things you can't do in the private sector, it's an unbelievably powerful motivator. And you will see many of the neurodivergent best hackers in the world have popped in and popped out of the defense sector for the government. And we're fortunate enough to have 500 of the most influential, famous hackers in the world in our community. And they do both. They do both. They're hybrid or dual use, I think is the current kind of very inhumane technology term. And I think so when you have a strategy from CSOC coming down saying we want to identify this talent and we can give them the opportunities, you're tapping into a whole generation who are ready for it. And I think that's really exciting.
So we've mentioned it before, and you talked a lot about the kind of people and the STEM and the talent. And so historically, both defense and gaming have been perceived as very male-dominated domains. Is that a consideration? Is that something you're actively thinking about when you're looking at this esports?
I mean, definitely, and the numbers are bad. So I think at the age of 11, about 60% of chess players in this country are girls. By the age of 14, it's gone down to 40%, and then it drops year on year after that. So there's a whole bunch of sort of stigmas and perceived things that discourage young girls from staying in certain bits of education and playing certain games. And there's some things we can do about that. And I think there's a lot we can do about it if we feed that in at the start, not address that at the end. So we're looking particularly, you asked me about which games we play. We're looking particularly on which games we authorize across defense to make sure that there's a gender balance. This comes into the hardware too. Again, to be egregiously generalistic about it, but there is truth in it. boys like big rigs and big chairs and hardware, whereas, I got 2 teenage daughters. They're very happy gaming on their phones and they don't feel the need for the rest of the stuff. So you just got to think about, and some of that will be nature and some of that will be nurture, and we've got to untangle the connection between the two. But we definitely need to approach this from an inclusive and diverse perspective. A lot of that is about gender, but not exclusively. And let's face it, some of the gaming sites out there are cesspits of behavior. And, that's a real opportunity to start engaging with them. And did I mention, go back to physical sports? We use them. The reason we spread them around the world and use them so widely was that you could have an ethical conversation with, in my case, soldiers. They're not going to sit down and read Thomas Aquinas, not many of them, but you can have a conversation about winning and winning well, and, play up, play on, play the game, all that sort of stuff, cricket or rugby or whatever. You're very physical, very competitive, but there's a clear set of rules. And, that ethical aspect to it is very, very important. And it still is today, in physical games as well as online. So I think we've got to take on that challenge, take it really seriously, because in this battle for talent that Fergus referred to, there's no point only going after 50% of the population. We need to be going as broad as possible. And I'd just say, I endorse everything Fergus said about sort of neurodiverse talent and, people at the very top of the tree. But there's a lot of people who don't actually match that either. The middle of the curve kids, if you like, who are still spending an awful lot of time on gaming platforms. They may be getting on well at school. They may be, different to that, to that typification. But wow, they've got amazing careers ahead of them in tech, in wider cybersecurity, in national security, in industry. And they're going to earn very good money in that and, live a life full of purpose. But that might be different from what their mum and dad did. And we've got to encourage them to think more broadly about how to use those skills for the good of the nation. And, I think the numbers are, I think between the US and the UK, we're talking about, Fergus will probably remind me, it's about 4 million cyber jobs unfilled at the moment between the US and the UK. So there is huge scope for kids who aren't quite sure what they want to do, for us to identify talent and to develop it.
Excellent. So and again, you've talked about ethics quite a lot. So how do we ensure competitive gaming used by defence doesn't kind of cross a line into glamorizing conflict or misrepresenting realities of military service?
So I think, Carl and Fergus will have views. I think we've probably crossed that line already. If you look at some of the games that are out there, they probably do glamorize violence a bit. And somebody who's done quite a lot of that over the past 35 years, I get quite uncomfortable with some of that I see, some of the visuals in there. To be honest, I think that's in wider entertainment too. I see movies that I think actually, you're not talking about, protecting your country here and lots of noble virtues that I'd absolutely sign up to. They've crossed the line already. So I think we need to reset on that and think very carefully what sort of behaviors we're encouraging. And I say this, given yesterday's tragic events, we got to be really thoughtful about what behaviors we're encouraging and the way that people do get radicalized, and they get radicalized, including on gaming sites. But the way to deal with that is not hold them at arm's length. It's to pull them in and start engaging and seeing what we can do materially to change the condition there. So I think we've got to be very careful. There's been coverage recently of how in Ukraine, there's been some gamification, incentivization of drone teams. And that sort of led to some shock headlines that, we're gamifying war, or the Ukrainians were gamifying war. Actually, if you look into the detail of it and the way it was constructed, there was lots of ethics built in. And they were very careful to reward the right behaviors that led to ethical outcomes, not unethical outcomes. But of course, that gets lost a bit in the headlines. So it's a real concern. It's one we've got to take on up front and sort of front end load. And, I've spent my whole career in uniform. Ethics, the laws of war have been fundamental to my life. That's why I sleep at night. I've made mistakes, but I can always go back and show why I did the right thing at the right time. And, that's fundamentally important to any soldier or sailor or aviator you speak to. And we need to build that into our approach here, just as we did into those physical games a couple of 100 years ago.
Carl, Fergus, is there anything you'd like to add to that regarding ethics?
Yeah, I suppose it always helps, I suppose, shining a light on a particular area. Say, as Tom mentions, about kind of the potential dark areas of the particular games or the particular communities. And I think the more that it kind of comes to the surface a little bit more, you can start to identify kind of the right communities as well. I think it's also where there's the shift from just gaming into esports. And I mentioned around the community start to shift a little bit more. And yeah, I think so. Having it such that the right communities are being engaged on it, and yeah, it's an environment of more the kind of determination to win, and the recognition of the cross applicable skills. I think that's kind of a key area to address as well.
Call of Duty is one of 100 games, right? And actually, so we did a research program with 2 universities that evaluated the top 100 games in the world and what behaviors you learn as a gamer, and then what technical skills you learn as a hacker of those games. And it's so interesting. You've got the first-person the shoot 'em up games, we call them the games that go bang, which are the Call of Duties. But then you've got turn-based games, which is, board games like Risk, which is now they're all digitized, which are deeply strategic war games. You've got social games like the Mario Kart games. You've got the creative games. Actually, they tell you the most. Roblox and Minecraft. These are the ones that will give you way more data on the creativity and puzzle solving of people. And then you've got, puzzles, cryptographic games. And when you look at the whole spectrum, you get so many indicators of abilities and characters and how people think. I'm a mastery gamer. What I mean by that is I like to play EAFC. It's a football game, and I want to be unbelievably good at that game. And I'm not so good at the games like Call of Duty and those kind of stuff. My brain just doesn't work that way. So if you can understand the game type and then the brain type, you can start to build a profile of it. So of course, the headlines in esports always leans into the Call of Duties of the world. But there are so many other games that are teaching so many great behaviors that actually can build, and are not ethical challenged at all. The only ethics are how much are you going to cheat? Because by nature, and by the way, rugby players cheat all the time. If you've ever been at the bottom of a ruck, I mean, there's not a rule book anywhere near that thing. So, but and that's the only ethical thing, but it's not so dramatic as in conflict games.
I just wanted to pick up one thing, because of course, some people will be listening thinking, okay, so to Fergus's narrative, there are kids out there committing cybercrime and you want to recruit them. What about punishing them? I mean, there is that element to it. And people are, as you've seen with the co-op and M&S hacks, law enforcement action being taken. And I'll be careful what I say now, but the military has for centuries been a choice for people who are going the wrong side of the tracks, as a way of nudging them back onto the right side of the tracks. And certainly, I mean, I think it's less frequent now, but certainly when I joined, a lot of the sort of senior non-commissioned officers had exactly that choice put to them by a magistrate. There'd been a tearaway kid doing a little bit the wrong thing, nothing very serious. And the magistrate said, you're going the wrong way. How about you go to the army? They'll sort you out. They'll give you discipline. And of course we did. And we're amazing at taking people in and building a family around them, building a team around them, building a tribe around them, and connecting them with purpose. And as I think Fergus brought out earlier, these kids are doing, cybercrime online. Yes, some of them being recruited then to go into proper sort of ransomware teams and the serious stuff. Most of them having fun, solving problems. They don't necessarily frame what they're doing as a crime or bad. They're solving problems and having fun. You can connect that energy and that brain power to purpose, and we're off to the races. So that's the vision. Clearly, there are ethical decisions to make there, and they're made every day by the FBI and the NCA and others, where we pick up people with real talent, and there are difficult conversations about how to deal with that talent and where to put them. But at scale, this is not a new problem. We've been dealing with these sort of issues in this country for centuries, and I think we've got a really proud track record of taking people who might be veering on the wrong side of the tracks and bring them back onto true north. And I think that's an amazing outcome for the nation, actually, in terms of social value.
Thank you all so much. It's been an incredibly interesting discussion. I guess this is kind of final takeaway. So for anyone who's listening, who's curious about defense, esports, digital careers, what advice or encouragement would you offer them?
I think it is really the recognition that playing a game can be a good thing, and it can lead to really good things. So if your parents give you a kind of stick on by playing a game for an hour or 2 hours in the evening instead of doing your homework, or actually kind of the academic side of leading to a career versus the non-academic side of leading to a career. I think it's really important for there to be that recognition that there is a lot of validity on both sides of it, and that kind of as we've been saying, the amount of skills that you can gain from playing the games and from doing the esports, and some of those skills and traits that come alongside of it, like I mentioned, kind of about probably playing the games and then coding the games, ultimately led me to where I am now in BAE. I don't think I'd be there if I'd have selected different hobbies. So I think, having a really good think about kind of where they're going to take you, how important those skills are going to be going forward, and kind of, knowing that just because you're not necessarily academic, that's not the end of the road, and that there are skills to be recognized. And I think the whole gaming and esports environment is a really useful one for those to be recognized.
So, Tom, so I go next because then you can finish with the big one. So I think the industry has got to stop measuring the wrong things. So right now, the cybersecurity industry and the defense industry are measuring certificates and years of experience in professional world. By doing so, they are missing out on an entire generation of talent. And because an 11-year-old who's developed modification software and has done so for a decade in gaming and has got unbelievable achievements on the gaming platforms and has been hacking the games, has more real world experience than a computer science graduate who's been working in a lab for 3 years and done an internship. So we're evaluating the wrong things. There's an entire generation out there of incredible skills development. If you are interested, then come to the hacking games, because we've built a data platform called the Hacking Aptitude AI platform that looks at your performance on gaming. It looks at your cheats and modifications that you've been creating on those gaming platforms, on the 100 top games in the world. And we have a psychographic platform developed by Professor Mark Loftus that looks at your levels of neurodivergence and your problem-solving mindset, so that you can get a hacking aptitude profile, which enables the invisible to be visible. We don't look at university certificates. We don't look at resumes. We don't care about your compliance certificates. What we care is about the real evaluation of your gaming mindset and how you've been testing that in the intensity. As Carl knows, it's incredibly intense and competitive gaming, like ferocity of no bounds in the civilian world. And we look at that, and we think that is the best true view of this talent. So, and that is narrowing the gap between a generation of natural born hackers who are off the grid and a 4.8 million labor deficit that is not being filled. And that's how we fill it.
So look, I'll just zoom back from that. I mean, amazing, powerful sort of testimony there. I think I'd say a couple of things. Firstly, for the youngsters out there who struggle to convince their parents of the value of what they're doing, try and bring them into it. I mean, my daughter started with, hey, Dad, do you want to play a bit of Roblox? They beat me up on Roblox, but it's fun. And you suddenly start realizing, wow, they're really good at these sort of things that do correlate to what I do in my work every day. That's why I'm rubbish at it, because I stab the screen. I don't flow with the screen, all these sort of things. So there's something there about children lead up to your parents and get them involved in a sort of way, because I think there's a much wider societal thing here about stopping this sort of prejudicial tropes that really don't understand what our kids are doing. And I guess when I was that age, I was watching telly and my parents thought I should be out breaking my legs. I was out falling out of trees and breaking my legs too. But, it's that conversation we need to start. That's my much wider thing than national security or defense. But that's thing one. Thing two is, I think the major message is, both to people already inside defense who like playing these games, we're starting to recognize the amazing skills, the amazing teamwork, the amazing relevance of these games to our jobs as national security and defense professionals. So that's one thing to people inside defense already. And then to people who might never even imagine of joining, the Army, Navy, Air Force, the Cyber Command, joining BAE Systems, joining the civil service, there's a place for you here. And we're increasingly aware how narrow our talent pool has become, and we need to explain our relevance and what we do. And there's a whole village in defense. We have roles for lawyers, we have roles for English literature graduates like me. It's not all about STEM, but but we like STEM too. And we need to better explain what our purpose is. The idea of making this country secure at home and strong abroad is really, really important in these quite uncertain times. And we need to do a far better job to explain what it is to be part of national security, what it is to be part of one defense. And I think I'd just sum it up as we need to meet people where they are rather than where we are. And we need to come to them and explain what our purpose is, what our mission is, and how they can play a part in it. I think that if we do that, all will be well, because as somebody said, the first thing is this battle for talent. That's what we're engaged in at the moment. But thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, all of you, General Tom, Fergus, Carl, for taking time to have this discussion with us today. And for our audience, if you have any questions on this topic or are looking to hear more about any particular topics featured on the podcast, please do email into the show on podcast@baesystems.com.